The World Cup is supposed to be the purest thing in football. No transfer fees, no club politics, no billionaire owners deciding who gets to compete. Just nations, just players, just football. For 1 month every 4 years, the sport strips itself back to something that is supposed to feel bigger than money, bigger than leagues, bigger than any single club or sponsor or broadcast deal. That is what the World Cup is supposed to be. So the real question is, what actually happened to it? Because when you look at what FIFA has done to this tournament over the last 3 decades, when you follow the money properly and track the decisions that were made and who they were made for, a very clear picture emerges. And it is not a comfortable one. The World Cup did not decline by accident. It was not bad luck or changing times or the natural evolution of the sport. It was a series of deliberate decisions made by people who understood exactly what they were doing, driven by one thing above everything else. And by the end of this, I think you will see that the greatest sporting event on the planet was not destroyed from the outside. It was hollowed out from within by the very organization that was supposed to protect it. Because the question is not whether FIFA has succeeded. It has obviously succeeded. The question is what it actually succeeded at. To understand what FIFA did to the World Cup, you first have to understand what the World Cup actually was. The tournament that grew through the 1970s and into the 1986 and 1990 editions was something genuinely rare in global sport. It was unpredictable in a way that felt almost dangerous. Cameroon beating Argentina in 1990, Algeria eliminating West Germany in 1982. The sense that on any given day, any nation could produce something nobody had prepared for, something that rewrote what people believed was possible. The 1990 World Cup in Italy is often criticized now for being low-scoring and overly defensive. And that is fair, but even then, 24 teams competed, and every single match carried real weight. There were no dead rubbers in the group stage that everyone knew were meaningless. The margins were tight enough that a single goal in a single game could end a nation's entire tournament. Players understood that. Coaches understood that. And the fans watching at home understood that too, even if they could not articulate exactly why every match felt like it mattered. The format had been built around a simple principle: the best teams in the world competing at their absolute peak under maximum pressure to find out who was actually the best. Not the most commercially viable, not the most geographically representative, not the most useful for expanding broadcast rights into new markets, just the best. That principle held for decades, and then FIFA started dismantling it one decision at a time. The first major shift came in 1998 when the World Cup expanded from 24 teams to 32, and on the surface that sounds reasonable. More nations represented, more of the world included. A wider, more global tournament that reflects the sport's growth across every continent. But what the expansion actually did was introduce a structural problem that has compounded with every cycle since. Because when you go from 24 to 32 teams, you do not just add 8 more competitive nations, you add 8 teams who, in most cycles, are not genuinely capable of winning the tournament. You add group stage matches that are effectively settled before they begin. You add score lines like Germany 8, Saudi Arabia 0, Spain 5, Honduras 0, Portugal 6, North Korea 0. Matches where the outcome was never really in question and the only variable was how large the winning margin would be. Now here is the number that matters. In the 32-team era from 1998 to 2022, the average margin of victory in the group stage has been 1.8 goals. In the 24-team era from 1982 to 1994, it was 1.4 goals. That might sound like a marginal difference, but what it tells you is that the group stage became measurably less competitive the moment FIFA expanded it. The matches got wider, the gaps between the strongest and weakest teams got bigger, and the dead rubbers, games in the final group stage round where one or both teams had nothing meaningful to play for, became a recurring feature of a tournament that was supposed to carry maximum pressure in every single game. And FIFA knew exactly what they were doing. The expansion was not driven by football logic. It was not driven by a genuine belief that the 25th, 26th, 27th, and 28th best teams in the world deserved a place at the sport's highest table. It was driven by the most straightforward commercial logic imaginable. More teams means more participating nations. More participating nations means more broadcast markets activated. More broadcast markets means a larger global rights auction. More matches means more advertising inventory to sell. The move from 24 to 32 teams was not about improving the tournament. It was about increasing the size of the commercial product being sold. The football quality was the price FIFA paid, and they paid it without hesitation. Because in 2017, FIFA voted to expand the World Cup again, this time from 32 teams to 48, starting from the 2026 tournament in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And this is where the argument stops being about interpretation and starts being about simple arithmetic. A 48-team World Cup means that roughly 1 in 3 of the participating nations will arrive with no realistic possibility of winning the tournament. It means a group stage so bloated that FIFA's original proposed format involved groups of just 3 teams, meaning every single group game would effectively be a knockout match. That sounds dramatic and exciting until you think about what it actually creates. 3-team groups mean that 2 nations can collude in the final group game to eliminate a third. You only need both teams to play out a specific score line that sends them both through at the expense of the nation that went first. FIFA themselves acknowledged this risk before the 2026 tournament and were forced to restructure the format to groups of 4 to try and prevent it. The organization that designed the expansion had to redesign the competition specifically to prevent the corruption that their own expansion made structurally possible. The revenue logic behind all of this is not even subtle. FIFA's own financial projections estimated the 48-team World Cup would generate over $11 billion in total revenue. The 32-team Qatar 2022 World Cup generated approximately $7.5 billion. The expansion from 32 to 48 teams is projected to be worth roughly $3.5 billion in additional revenue per cycle. That single number explains every decision FIFA has made about the tournament format over the last decade. Not sporting merit, not competitive integrity, not the quality of football that the fans watching at home will actually see. $3.5 billion per 4-year cycle. And then there is the question of where the tournament gets held. Because the host nation selection process has been one of the most consistently corrupt and damaging elements of FIFA's governance for over 2 decades, and this is not speculation or allegation from journalists with an agenda. People went to prison. People were banned from football for life. The United States Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation into football's global governing body and indicted over 40 individuals on charges including racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering. The 2010 bidding process for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups is where the full scale of it became impossible to ignore. 2 executive committee members were suspended before the vote after being caught on camera accepting cash bribes. A Sunday Times investigation documented payments made to officials in exchange for votes. Russia won the right to host 2018 despite serious and documented concerns about political interference, fan safety, and the treatment of opposition groups. Qatar won the right to host 2022 despite having no established football culture, no climate remotely suitable for a summer tournament, and stadiums that did not yet exist and would require massive construction projects to build. The Qatar decision changed the World Cup in ways that went far beyond the political controversy. Because hosting a tournament in Qatar during June and July, when outdoor temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, was simply not possible. So FIFA moved the 2022 World Cup to November and December. For the first time in the tournament's history, the World Cup was played in the middle of the European domestic season. Leagues were paused mid-campaign. Players arrived at the tournament without proper preparation windows, mid-rhythm from club football, and returned to their clubs mid-season with the psychological and physical weight of a World Cup campaign behind them. The entire global football calendar was disrupted for hundreds of millions of supporters worldwide, not because it produced better football, not because the players or clubs or fans asked for it, because a decision made in a Zurich conference room a decade earlier had committed the tournament to a location that could not accommodate a summer schedule.
And then, there is what sat underneath the construction of that tournament. Reports from human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, documented the deaths of thousands of migrant workers, during the building of the Qatar World Cup infrastructure. The figures vary depending on the methodology used, but even the most conservative estimates point to a death toll that, in any other industry, would have triggered international investigation and accountability. FIFA's former response was to state that worker welfare was the legal responsibility of the host nation. The organization that awarded the tournament accepted billions in revenue from it and promoted it globally to an audience of 5 billion people declined to accept meaningful responsibility for the human cost of building it. Think about what that actually means at the scale of this tournament. 5 billion people watch the 2022 World Cup. That is roughly 60% of the human population. No other single sporting event comes close to that number. No Super Bowl, no Olympics, no Champions League final. The World Cup is the one moment in sport where the entire planet is watching the same thing at the same time. And FIFA owns that moment completely. They own the broadcast rights, the sponsorship packages, the stadium naming rights, the ticketing infrastructure, the licensing deals. Every element of the experience that those 5 billion people have is filtered through an organization that has proven repeatedly that its primary obligation is to its own financial growth rather than to the quality of the product those people are watching. But here's the part of the story I find most uncomfortable, because you can point to the expansion, to the corruption, to Qatar, and FIFA will always have a counter-argument ready. They will tell you that football has never been more global. They will point to the billions distributed to member associations in developing nations. They will show you participation numbers and broadcast reach figures and argue that the World Cup's growth has genuinely spread the sport to corners of the world where it barely existed a generation ago. And some of that is real. Football is more global now than it was in 1990. More children in more countries have access to the sport. The grassroots infrastructure in many developing football nations has improved partly because of the distributions FIFA makes from World Cup revenue. But when you look at what the fans who actually care most about football believe, the picture becomes more complicated. Survey after survey of core football supporters, people who follow the sport year-round and not just every 4 years, consistently shows majority opposition to the 48-team expansion on quality grounds. The people who love the game the most are, on balance, against the decisions that FIFA keeps making in their name. And that exposes the central problem. FIFA does not answer to football fans. It answers to its 211 member associations. Many of those associations, particularly from regions with historically limited World Cup representation, support expansion because it increases their nation's chances of qualifying. That is understandable at a human level. But it means the tournament's format is being decided by a voting structure where the interests of nations who cannot realistically win the World Cup consistently outweigh the sporting logic of keeping the competition at its highest level. The people who benefit most from expansion are not the supporters watching at home. They are the member associations receiving larger financial distributions, the broadcasters with more matches to sell, and FIFA banking billions more per cycle. There is a version of the story that ends in pure cynicism. FIFA broke the World Cup. The money won. The football lost. Nothing will ever change because the machine is too profitable to dismantle. But I do not think that conclusion is fully honest. Because every 4 years, regardless of what FIFA has done to the structure around it, something still happens on that pitch that no amount of institutional corruption can manufacture or script or buy. Messi, in 2022, finally lifting the only trophy his career had been missing, breaking down on the pitch in a way that went beyond football entirely. Morocco reaching the semifinal for the first time in the tournament's history, carrying an entire continent's sense of possibility with them. Japan beating Germany and Spain in the same group stage. Senegal, South Korea, Croatia, producing moments that reminded the world why the tournament exists in the first place. Those moments are not produced by FIFA. They emerge from the game itself, despite everything that has been layered on top of it. And that is what makes this story genuinely painful, rather than just infuriating. The World Cup still carries the capacity to produce something real. The raw material, the football, the players, the nations, the weight of what it means to represent your country on the biggest stage in the sport is still there. What FIFA has done is surround that capacity with so much commercial infrastructure, so much diluted competition, and so much institutional self-interest that whenever something genuine breaks through, it feels like it happened in spite of the tournament, rather than because of it. The fans who save for years to buy a ticket, who travel across the world to watch their nation play, who stay awake until 3 a.m. in countries that will never qualify, they are not there for FIFA. They never were. They are there for the football. And FIFA has spent 30 years monetizing that loyalty without ever being genuinely accountable to it. So here is the verdict. FIFA did not fail commercially. By every financial measure they use to define success, the World Cup is the most valuable sports property on the planet. The revenue will keep growing. The 2026 tournament will be the largest in the history of the competition by almost every metric FIFA publishes. But if you judge the World Cup by what it is supposed to be, the pinnacle of the sport, the purest competitive test, the 1 month every 4 years when the best football on earth decides everything, then the gap between what was promised and what was delivered is undeniable, and it is widening. The expansion diluted the competition in 1998, and it will dilute it further in 2026. The host selection process was corrupted by the commercial weight of what the tournament generates. The calendar was restructured around financial commitments rather than footballing ones, and the organization responsible for all of it has faced no consequence that has changed its behavior because the machine it built is now too large, too embedded in global sport, and too profitable for anyone with real power to want to dismantle it. The World Cup still produces moments that remind you why football matters more than almost anything else. But those moments now feel like they are escaping from the tournament rather than being created by it. FIFA did not set out to destroy the World Cup. They set out to own it. And in the end, that turned out to be the same thing.